Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're waiting for more people to join the meeting, so please bear with us for a few minutes and we'll get started shortly. Thank you.
Buenos días, gracias por acompañarnos. La sesión iniciará en un par de minutos. Estamos dando oportunidad a que más personas ingresen a la sesión. Gracias por su paciencia.
Good morning for those of you just joining us. We're just waiting for a few more people to come to the meeting before we get started. It'll be just a few more minutes. Thank you.
Para quienes acaban de iniciar sesión con nosotros, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. De nuevo iniciaremos en un par de minutos. Estamos dando oportunidad a que más personas ingresen a la sesión.
Good morning again. Those of you just joining us, we're going to get started in 1 minute. So please be patient and we'll be right with you.
Para quienes acaban de iniciar su sesión con nosotros, gracias por acompañarnos. Iniciaremos en un minuto. Gracias por su paciencia.
Good morning, everyone. It's 5 minutes after 10. We'll go ahead and get the meeting started. My name is Martin Reeder, and I am the principal planner with the City of National City, and I'll be kicking things off this evening. Please, if you haven't done so already, select your preferred language from the interpretation menu. We will have interpretation in both English and Spanish, and we'll have a reminder as we move forward. Next slide, please.
Buenos días. Como se acaba de indicar, vamos a contar con servicio de interpretación simultánea. Para hacer uso del servicio, simplemente desplácese a la barra de controles de Zoom en la parte inferior de la pantalla y ahí debe de ver un icono que dice Interpretation o interpretación, parece un globo terráqueo, y seleccionaría Spanish, español, y si nos está acompañando desde la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular, tableta, etcétera, presione primero los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. Thank you once again. As has been stated, we will have interpretation available. To use the feature, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen, click on the interpretation icon, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, the 3 dots, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
Great. If we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll go through the agenda. So first of all, we'll start with introductions of staff and our consultant team. We'll talk about some webinar housekeeping. Then we'll get into the main portion of the webinar, which will be 3 different sections. First, dealing with land use and housing. The second, dealing with transportation. And then finally, safety and the climate action plan. Then we'll be having some breakout activities, which I'll talk about in a moment. Then some general Q&A at the end, a question and answer. And then we'll have some closing remarks. We anticipate being 2 hours today. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there will be we will have breakout rooms, which are an interactive activity. So we will be having live comment. You will each be in a separate room. We'll be doing that 3 different times so that we can get your input on some maps and some other questions so that we can record those and report back. Again, we will have a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So if there are any other questions that you have to ask or that you've missed, feel free to put those in the chat and we will get through those at the end of the webinar today. As with all of our other workshops and webinars, this meeting presentation and a summary of the questions and answers, will be posted online on the project webpage, which is nationalcityca.gov/FGPU, as in Focused General Plan Update. So this is the second meeting. We had another one last night. We thank you for attending. And we also are going to have some office hours. The dates and times are going to be listed on the project website also. Next slide, please. Again, my name is Martin Reeder with the city. Also from the City of National City, we have Carlos Aguirre, who is the Director of the National City Housing Authority. Also with the Housing Authority, we have Angelita Palma, who is our Housing Programs Manager, and Myra Martinez, who is our Housing Program Specialist too. And from our City Engineering Department, Public Works Department, we have Roberto Llano, who is the Director of Public Works and the City Engineer. And we also have Jose Lopez, Deputy City Engineer, on the line as well. Next slide, please. And our consultant group this evening, who will be doing the majority of the presentation. First, we have Tara Lake, who is the Project Manager, and we'll be talking about land use and housing. Then we will have Seth Torma, who will be talking about transportation planning, Stephanie Whitmore, who will be talking about environmental planning, and Ryan Whipple, who will also be talking about transportation planning. Ryan is also a National City resident and is chair of our Traffic Safety Committee. Next slide, please. So without further ado, we will get started and I'll hand it over to Tara. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Martin, and welcome everybody. Thank you for spending your morning with us. We really appreciate it. And although 2 hours sounds like a long time, I think it'll hopefully go by fast. We've got a lot of information, and I think the breakout rooms you'll find engaging. So I'll just quickly go over kind of a general what it is we're doing. And if you attended our first webinar, this might be a little bit of a repeat. Our webinars that were back in the summer, a little bit of repeat, but just in case you didn't, we want to kind of go over some of this stuff. Then we'll get into what we've been doing since then. So we are working on a focused general plan update. What is a general plan? This is required by the state of California for all cities in California. This is really the blueprint that guides the development, guides how we accommodate growing population and changing demographics and changing industry, et cetera. We also have to address new state legislation in regards to housing, land use and transportation, and safety and climate change. And this really builds upon all the great planning work that National City has done recently to update the general plan to reflect that. We'll go over that a little bit more later. And then of course, we'll address the changing regional context and future growth. Next slide. And so the elements that we are looking at with this update are housing, land use, transportation, safety, and then we're also doing a climate action plan update. And along with that, we're updating any kind of the zoning code or specific plans to reflect, any of those kind of changing or additional policies and goals that will be in these elements. We are also creating objective design standards. That's also part of new legislation in relation to housing to allow some housing that meets certain criteria to go by right and not go through the entitlement process. And then we're also doing a SEIR, which is Supplemental Program Environmental Impact Report. We'll go into that a little bit more later too. Next slide. And to kind of show you where we've been and where we're going, we kind of kicked this off and started working on existing conditions analysis back in the spring of 2020. We immediately had to kind of pivot and change our outreach because of the COVID pandemic. We did a survey that was very interactive and digital and had really great participation. We held a series of webinars back in the summer and held office hours. And then in the fall, we conducted stakeholder interviews. We started working on the vision, goals, and policies. And in the winter, and now here we are in the spring, we've been working on the land use and mobility recommendations. We're, of course, in our next series of webinars right now, and we'll be holding office hours, and we'll go over those times with you. We have submitted the draft housing element to the state's Housing and Community Development Department because there is a state deadline for that. So that's in review right now. And it's also on our project website and it's open for public review until April 1st. So please take a look at it and let us know if you have any comments or suggestions. And so the upcoming milestones is we will draft the remaining elements in climate action plan, work on the environmental review, and start the technical studies. And so that then leads us to the fall and then the winter of 2022, where we'll be finishing the environmental review and then having the hearings and approvals. Next slide. And we've reached out to the community to try to get the participation in these webinars. While you're here today, we sent out mailers to all residents and all businesses. We have a website that has a lot of information on it. We blasted the announcement through social media and the city email listserv. Next slide. And as I kind of already mentioned, our outreach efforts, and maybe I'll just also mention that on January 26th, we had a joint City Council and Housing Advisory Committee workshop. And then upcoming, we will have the SEIR scoping meeting and the Planning Commission and City Council hearings. Next slide. Next slide. So now I'll be going into the housing element and land use. So the housing element is required by state law. All cities have to have a housing element. This really guides where, how much housing should be built throughout the city, but also what programs, what kind of changes in the municipal code, et cetera, should be done to help implement this. Next slide. And so a regional housing needs assessment is determined by SANDAG. And so that process has already happened. And so this graph shows you, how many units the what we call the RENA has established. So 5,437 for National City. And you can see the breakdown there between the various income groups. Is it what we're striving for to produce at least that many housing units? Next slide. And so a large part of the housing element is a site inventory and analysis, kind of looking at where this housing should go. And so The icons over there on the right are the different metrics that we looked at, whether it's vacant or not, whether it's next to mobility options and public amenities, whether it's been in another cycle of a housing element and it's not been developed, what the zoning is it already zoned for multifamily, what the lot size is, the structure age, any structures on the property, the development capacity on the site, property valuation, whether or not city owned or another government institution, and whether there's been any previous, recent development interest in the site. So those are the variety of metrics that we look at. Next slide. And so you see on the top here for commercial sites, we look at whether or not these sites are empty or they're vacant, these buildings, if there's for lease signs, for sale signs, and whether or not these property owners have come to talk to city staff about, that they are looking to sell or to lease, et cetera. And of course, we look at if sites are vacant or not. And at the bottom here, just some images showing what I kind of just went over too, of whether or not they're next to mobility options or other services like schools, et cetera. Next slide. And so we have produced the site inventory. So that's part of the draft housing element. And we have the map, the map up here on the slide. I mean, I realize it's probably hard to see on monitors, but please, it's online in the draft housing element. And so please look at it if you're interested and want to know more about it. And so this, of course, shows vacant sites, city-owned sites. It shows future infill sites, whether or not they're vacant or non-vacant. And then we also showed entitled sites or pending projects, and also sites that were permitted or constructed in the last cycle. Next slide. And so we have developed various housing programs. So I'll just kind of run through these, but also if you'd like more detail, more is explained in the housing element, or we're happy to explain them to you as well if you want to call us or email us. So housing production monitoring program, housing choice voucher and rental assistance program, first time home buyer program, fair housing program. Next slide. Community Housing Development Organizations Program, Community Land Trust, Housing Education and Resource Outreach, Focus General Plan Update, Infill and Transit-Oriented Development Opportunities, Inclusionary Housing, next slide. Development Impact Fee Study, Accessory Dwelling Unit, what we call ADUs, Ordinance and Permit Ready Program, Parking Study, Objective Design Standards, Development Processing Revisions and Municipal Code Update, and Housing Unit Replacement Program. Next slide. And so now we'll move on to land use. So what is a land use element? In its a basic definition, it's looking at the distribution and location and extent of uses for land. So whether that's with housing, businesses, industrial, open space, public space, et cetera. Next slide. And so this is the existing land uses in National City. You can see that the yellow is residential, so it's primarily residential. You could also see the red is outlines the corridors, and those corridors are zoned mixed use and fairly high density. And then of course you can see downtown as well as in the West Side Specific Plan area that there's also a fair amount of density and commercial and office there. And then of course, towards the water, you can see it's zoned or the land use is industrial. Next slide, please. And this is the zoning map, the existing adopted zoning map, which gives, of course, more detail to what exactly can be the uses that can go in those zones. Next slide. And as we're looking at land use, recommendations, we of course examine the existing transit lines and bus lines. Next slide. And we're looking at transit priority areas. This is a state definition, so that's why we're calling it candidate now, and then would like to get these approved. But basically, it's from a quarter mile from a trolley stop or from two intersecting bus lines at a certain frequency. And so within these transit priority areas, we'll be looking at that, potentially because they're so accessible to transit, that maybe potentially reducing parking requirements, or maybe, other incentives for affordable housing and housing in these areas. Next slide. And so this is this graph, or this graphic up here called a 10-minute neighborhood. That is from the Interconnect project that was done in 2000 or 2020. And that is looking at designing for 10-minute neighborhoods, meaning that you can get to your kind of day-to-day activities and errands and the services you need to attend to within a 10-minute, bike or walk ride or walk. And so, for instance, being able to go to your school, or go to your business, go to a restaurant, go to a garden, go to a medical office, etc. So many of the recommendations that you'll see coming up, stem from this study that has been already done, and looking at areas that are kind of close to these different activities. Next slide. And so I'm going to go over with you some recommendations on changing some of the zoning. So D Avenue from 4th Street to East 30th Street, we're looking at rezoning it from 9 dwelling units per acre to a zone of RM2, which is 48 dwelling units per acre. And the reason why is there's a bus line along D Avenue. This is within one of those proposed TPAs I was just talking about. It's within a quarter mile of downtown, so it's close to services. There's existing multifamily on the block, as you can see here on that picture, with kind of a similar proposed density. And when I was referring to Interconnect shows us as a high propensity area for a 10-minute neighborhood. Next slide. And this just shows you that area I'm talking about. The yellow is what it's currently zoned at, that 9 DU per acre. And if you show the next slide, and that's what we're proposing to the 40 DU per acre. Next slide, please. And so 4th Street between A Avenue and Palm Avenue, we're also looking to rezone that from 9 dwelling units per acre to 48. Similar reasons, there's also a bus running along on 4th Street, and there are class 2 bike lanes. It's within a proposed TPA. There's existing multifamily. It's also within a high propensity area for 10-minute neighborhood. Next slide. And so you can see the extent of which we're talking about here. Again, you can see how it's mostly now zoned to that yellow of RS2. Next slide. And that we would be recommending to rezone it to RM2, the 48 DU per acre. Next slide. And East 18th Street from B Avenue to D Avenue, also proposing to rezone it from mostly 9 DU per acre to 48 DU per acre. Again, similar reasons you can see there listed. Next slide. And so you can see the portion that we're talking about there. Next slide. Great, thank you. Next slide. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Seth, and he's going to talk to you about the transportation element.
Thank you, Tara. Hi, everybody, and great to see everyone. Some of you are familiar faces from existing conditions and the last time we got together. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the transportation element, which includes all forms of transportation, from goods movement to vehicles to pedestrians, bikes, etc. And so first and foremost, it's just really important to understand that we're not starting from scratch as a team. There's a ton of great planning documents and planning projects that have been going on in National City, and we want to build from that understanding and experience. And so here's just some of those efforts shown here. Next slide. The other thing that we want to consider as part of the development of these recommendations, we considered all of the great input that we received from you, the community. And so you can see here just really almost 1,000 individual comments from the community have been taken into account. And that really helps us. Nobody understands your community like the people that live and work there, you guys. And so we've taken that input and synthesized it into the recommendations that you see here today. So part of what we want to do is we hope that you see something that you've mentioned on the map today. Next slide. And then the third element that we put together, of course, the previous plans, your input, we also want to look at these critical factors and an analysis based around these. What safety and reliability. We've looked at safety data, and that's helped inform the plans and the recommendations that you'll see here today. Connectivity to key destinations, meaning transit, retail, grocery stores, schools, those places and parks that you want to go. That's been taken into consideration, land use. And then we want to support, fundamentally, we want to support economic development in the city, and we want to make the city ready for the future. Next slide. And so based on that, we've developed these recommendations shown here. And in the breakout rooms coming up at the end of this presentation, this is what we're going to dive into. We want to make sure that we get your input on these recommendations that you see here. And this is the host of pedestrian recommendations. Next slide. And what you'll see as part of those recommendations is you're going to see places where we've identified opportunities and needs for things like improving the underpasses on the freeways. From what you see above, which is on the I-5, one of the dark underpasses, to maybe an opportunity to improve it to something shown below through better lighting, making it more convenient and accessible to pedestrians with wider sidewalks, landscaping, and lighting. So that's the kinds of opportunities and needs that we found. Next slide. And then related to pedestrian, you'll see a term called pedestrian safety corridors. And an example of that would be looking at the street below. You can see here where we've had additional opportunities and identified additional opportunities for wider landscape areas to present more of a buffer between the pedestrians on the sidewalk and vehicles, higher visibility crosswalks, and narrower crossings across the street as shown here in that bottom picture, so that people don't have to, when they cross the street, they don't have to walk as far and be in traffic. And so you'll see opportunities and needs for those areas. Next slide. And then building on pedestrian corridors, sometimes those pedestrian corridors go right through retail areas where we need to look at additional factors like how do we support the retail in these areas through additional means like addressing parking. And this is a great example of showing on the top, showing a recent project on 8th Street where we have parallel parking on one side and diagonal parking on the other to make sure that the retail stores have accessible parking right in front to support them, and additional narrower crossings, pedestrian scale lighting. And then in the bottom photo, you can see many opportunities to cross the street as safely as possible. And you can see a mid-block crossing here that goes right through the median where there's some protection for the pedestrians to give people access from one side of the street to other. And so that's what the walkable retail corridors may look like. Next slide. And then in addition, we're going to focus in on this map where we've identified through, again, previous plans, input from you, and analysis, traffic calming needs within the city, as well as further bicycle new or improved bicycle facility recommendations. And so we'll dive into details on those two elements. And if we go to the next slide, we can see what do we mean by some of those features. Well, traffic calming is a way of slowing traffic down and reducing the travel speed of vehicles and maybe reducing the amount of vehicles on key roads. So there were a number of areas where speeding was shown to be a potential issue. And so what can we do through design to address that? So you can see features such as traffic circles shown in the top here, stop signs, although and features within the road to narrow the road down. In this case, we show a center median that narrows the road and slows traffic down. Or in the bottom slide, you can see a slight median or a chicane that causes vehicles to slow down to navigate through. So looking at features like that. Next slide. And we're also going to be looking at bike improvements. Frankly, like a lot of the amazing bicycle facilities that your city's been building over the last 5 or 10 years, a lot of those kinds of features. So we'll be looking at things like we've identified areas of opportunity for really further signage to really identify locations for people to use what are called low stress bike facilities that are really meant for all ages and abilities of bicycle users. We'll be looking for opportunities for buffered bike lanes shown here in the top right, which are not just bike lanes, but they give you even more room between the vehicles and the bike lane itself through that striped buffer, or traditional bike lanes as shown here. And so we're looking at all sorts of opportunities for improved or new bicycle facilities on top of the network that you already have, connecting to those key destinations. Next slide. I think that may be it. Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'm Alana Flaherty. I'm taking place for Stephanie Whitmore, who is not able to join us today. So I'll be speaking to the safety element. Next slide, please. So a safety element addresses public safety issues associated with both natural and man-made hazards. For example, fires, floods, earthquakes, and landslides. The element contains a series of maps that illustrate the geologic extent of certain hazardous conditions and contains a set of policies that serve to address these risks. Next slide, please. The contents of the element update remain fairly consistent with the 2011 safety element. However, we updated mapping and we also adopted and included a climate adaptation and resiliency section. Next slide. So here's an example of an updated map. This map shows current 100 and 500-year FEMA floodplains. We can see the greatest risk is mainly along the Sweetwater River, and it shows critical public facilities. So updating these maps allow the city to plan accordingly for infrastructure improvements and the placement of critical facilities in the future. Next slide. Here's another example of an updated map. This map illustrates potential wildfire risks within National City. Although wildfire risk is low within the city, there are areas of high danger to the east within the unincorporated portions of San Diego County. Next slide. So climate change poses a spectrum of risks to communities. Risks most likely to face National City include an increased number of extreme heat days, an increased frequency and intensity of precipitation, and sea level rise. So this element will evaluate the extent of these risks to National City using a mapping tool developed by the state of California based on a varying emissions scenario. So a greater future level of emissions is likely to translate into more days of extreme heat, intensified flooding events, and higher sea level rise. So finally, the element will identify strategies the city can employ to help this community adapt to these effects, such as the identification of cool zones and stormwater improvements within the city. Next slide. So we're going to be looking to hear from you on some solutions. We provide a few, but we'd like to hear what's important to you and what you would like to see in your community. Next slide. So now I'll be going into the climate action plan. Next slide. So today's climate change is widely accepted. It's scientifically documented that human-generated greenhouse gas emission sources contribute substantially to the greenhouse effect, where heat is trapped within the Earth's atmosphere, resulting in higher temperatures, rising sea levels, and other conditions that are pretty harmful to man-made and natural habitat. For example, transportation sources such as vehicle exhaust and emissions from power generated tied to energy are largely responsible for the majority of emissions around the globe. Next slide. So the Climate Action Plan guides the city and provides a roadmap for reducing its contribution to global climate change. First, we inventory and forecast current GHG emissions and forecast for future years if we were to continue on a business as usual basis. We then create emission reduction targets. Then these usually align with the state goals. And then we propose measures and policies to achieve these goals. Finally, we want to implement them, and we set performance standards and monitoring programs to ensure that we are doing our part. Next slide. Thank you. So as shown on this slide, this is the 2018 inventory prepared in this update. The Climate Action Plan addresses emission by sector. For example, you can see we have transportation, commercial and industrial, residential, solid waste and wastewater, and water. Transportation makes up about 60% of total community-wide emissions, followed by commercial and industrial at 30%. Next slide. Here is a graph showing business as usual emission based on these sectors. So we modeled future emission scenarios based on this business as usual scenario. So this would look like, this shows what emissions would look like if nothing further is done relative to climate mitigation. So we can see it kind of stays stable over time. Next slide. The city then set appropriate emission targets that align with state emissions reduction targets. So these state targets are set by a series of legislation and executive orders that have been enacted over the past decade or so. The state has met its 2020 goals. However, achieving reductions necessary to meet the 2030 and 2050 goals will be a little more difficult because both the state and local communities have achieved their low-hanging fruit. So, you know, there's that big gap there that we'll have to meet and move and strive towards. Next slide. So this graph shows business as usual emissions in dark blue and our mitigated forecast in light blue, which only right now includes community choice energy as a mitigation measure. We're currently in this stage of solidifying our measures. So right now we're just showing what CCE would look like for reducing our emissions. You can kind of see in the dark blue line there, that's our goal for those years. So just with this one mitigation measure, it doesn't necessarily reach that goal. So we will be looking to include more. CCE is a little less effective in National City just because National City is highly reliant on natural gas as opposed to electricity. So once we solidify our mitigation measures, we'll run another model to ensure, we're reaching those goals. Next slide. So this graph is a comparison between 2005 emissions in dark blue with 2018 emissions in light blue, and this is by sector and at the end total. So we can see transportation went down because of increase in fuel efficiency and cleaner fuel types. However, there was an increase in energy due to the increase in overall demand, but energy overall has become cleaner. Next slide. So this graph is showing a few things. So I'm going to walk you through it from left to right. So the bar on the left shows 2005 actual emissions from the 2011 cap. The next bar in dark blue is 2018 actual emissions compared to the light blue, which was our target set forth in the 2011 cap for the year 2020. So we can see we didn't necessarily hit that mark. The next set of bars show in dark blue projected 2030 business as usual from this 2020 cap update versus our goal that we're setting out for in this cap update for 2030. So you see there's that large jump that we're trying to meet. Next slide. So in order to do this, like I said, we have to implement some great strategies. So we're going to be looking from you to hear from you and prioritize measures that you'd like to see in your community. Again, like the safety element. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over. Thank you.
All right, if we can move to the next slide. We'll go ahead and get started with our breakout activities. So this is an opportunity for the project team to hear directly from you. We'll be moving everyone into a breakout room, and facilitators will be rotated about every 15 minutes and leading everybody through a different activity. For anyone who's listening on the Spanish channel, we request that you just drop your name into the chat, and that's just to make sure we can match you to the room with our interpreter. And if we accidentally move you, another member of our project team can move you back. So with that being said, in a few moments, everybody should be seeing an invitation to join a breakout room. Go ahead and accept. Hi, everybody. Hello. Let's see, let me expand. Okay, it looks like everybody's successfully moved into a breakout room. All right, Montserrat, Margarita, hello. Yeah, hi, everyone. So you've heard who I am already, but Suchi Lucas is our deputy project manager, so I'll introduce her. And Emma Brody is a planner with WSP, and so she'll be helping out in our breakout room. And it looks like we have Myra and Carlos from National City. So great. So yeah, Emma, if you could start sharing your screen. Fantastic. And this will be in here for just about 15 minutes, and we'll get little updates as we're kind of getting close to our time. But we definitely encourage you to participate and chat with us. So I'll just quickly go over, what is a complete and connected community, because that will help us for our next board. And I know I touched on this already in my presentation a little bit, but so complete means, that there's a land use and development pattern that really supports these 10-minute neighborhoods. So again, that you can really get to a lot of your day-to-day activities, without using a car. So whether that's by foot, by bike, by bus, by transit. And so that is, of course, the kind of the connected part that your mobility options can get you to these different places, quickly. So you don't have to drive to other communities, to other parts of San Diego, et cetera. Are there any comments or questions kind of on this concept? Can everyone, Suchi, is everyone able to unmute themselves at this point?
Yeah, and just to confirm process with our interpreter, Carlos. So if folks are listening in on the Spanish channel and trying to make a comment, are you able to convey that to us in English? We'll wait a few minutes. Okay, yes, please select.
Check. This is the English channel. The English channel check. So if there are comments in Spanish, you would now be hearing them in English.
Okay. And so are you able to hear directly from our participants on the Spanish channel? It looks
yes,
like we
the participants, when they open their mic, they will be speaking to the floor. So if anybody didn't choose interpretation, for example, Carlos, perhaps, I don't know how bilingual he is, but he might not choose English as his language, so he'd hear them in Spanish. And then for everybody that selected English, they'd hear me interpreting instead of the Spanish speaker.
Okay. Do we have any questions at this point?
We have a couple of comments indicating that they're unable to unmute.
Okay, I will see if I can manually go ahead and change that. All right, if we can have folks just try one more time to unmute?
I just got muted too, but I was able to unmute. This might be disturbing the other breakout rooms too, Suchi.
Yeah, it might be. Thank you for bearing with us as we figure out the logistics. Okay, I just switched the setting, asking everyone to unmute. So the floor should be open.
Sí, ya.
Sí, pueden hacer comentarios. Perfecto.
Yes. Now you can open your microphones and make comments. Great.
Oh, con respecto a este...
Okay, question. As far as this 10-minute neighborhood idea to be able to go anywhere in a national city, I think it's a good idea. However, my question would be, isn't this the breakout for land use and housing?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, so when we get to the next board, that'll be a little more apparent, but when we decide where to build housing and where to put other land uses, you know, we have these goals in mind. So this is one of the goals that we're hoping to achieve with our housing placement and our land use. And Emma, maybe if you go to the next board. Thank you. So
Apparently some people still can't open their mics.
yeah, it looks like Alicia is shaking her head no. And okay, so Suchi will continue to try to see what we can do there. We'll
Oh, ahí está. There it is.
okay,
Okay, got it. Able to unmute. Thank you.
great. And so on this board is kind of continues what I was talking about in my presentation. And right, you know, at the top, we're looking at 4th Street between D Avenue and 18th, but this will also applies to those other corridors I mentioned. And so we're looking at potentially increasing the amount of housing that can be built there, increasing the density. So the pictures at the bottom show a variety of different housing types. A 4-plex, that's kind of 4 units, you know, in one apartment. 2 to 3 story townhouse, condo, or apartments where the townhouse model really kind of has the front door kind of right on the sidewalk with the stairs coming down. A 2 to 3 story, what we call multifamily stacked flat. That's usually a denser product. So we're showing here that would be like up to 50 dwelling units per acre. And then the next option is looking at a mixed use product. So housing on the top and with retail at the bottom. And that could be also maybe offices like doctors' offices or retail with like restaurants, et cetera. And then we also have a kind of a picture for other, you know, maybe something even a little denser than what we're showing or maybe less dense. So yeah, we'd like to get your opinions on this kind of street that has good access to transit, has bus stops, it's close to services, but it's currently zoned a very low, you know, basically a single family density. So, you know, do you guys find that this other kind of density would be appropriate there, or we just kind of like your comments?
I have a question. I live on C Street in National City, behind the Bank of America. I'm a block away from D Avenue. And as you mentioned, I have easy access to the bus on D, and also on 8th Street, there's also buses that run. Right now, there's a project next to the Big Ben store where they're building something, but I'm not sure what it is. Will that be offices? Are there going to be, is that going to be housing? Do you know what's being built? Because it's a pretty tall building.
Yeah, and Carlos, that's the Andrew Malik property,
Correct.
right? Yeah. Yeah, so that is going to be housing with some retail at the bottom. And does that go up to about 5 stories, Carlos?
Yes,
4 to
5 stories.
5. Yeah, it's about 5 stories. Do you know offhand how many units that is approximately?
It's a little bit over 100 units, I believe. I don't have the
Mhm.
exact unit count. I can get that.
Yeah, they're kind of smaller units, and the idea was that there's communal space for them to use, but that would hopefully keep the price of those units down so that they would be affordable. They're not so that was the intention there, that they would be more affordable than typical market rate because they'll be a little bit smaller unit size, but they'll also have good amenities to use, so that kind of makes up for having a smaller unit. Hi, Sylvia. I can't remember if the parking is underground. They typically have to dig underground to put the supports for the building itself, for the foundation but Carlos, do you remember if there's underground parking?
As I recall, there's no underground.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah,
think so.
so parking is on behind the retail component of the project
Yeah, and you kind of
on the
access it
first
through the
floor.
alley, I
Yeah, so
think.
it's a podium and then with wood construction on the top.
Yeah. Oh no, and yeah, we're not necessarily focused on force. So yeah, any comments for kind of any of these
Yeah,
areas are
that's
great.
great feedback.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that parking is tight around that area. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, during the presentation, I saw some percentages as far as the housing income levels for the renter. So when you say low income, it's not clear to me what the household income would be, because it might, people's income might differ to what is defined as low income or extra low income in the city. So since you didn't go into it, I would like to know whether if we visit your plan documents, we'll be able to find that information there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, Emma, would you be able to toggle to that slide that has the RENA numbers on it, potentially? And it's okay if you can't. I do have it open on my screen. I'm kind of looking at it, but so the state defines very low income as 31 to 50% of area median income. So what they call AMI. So there's an established median income for a national city. And so if you make between 31 and 50% of that, then you fall into the very low income and qualify for that kind of housing. So low income is 51 to 80%, and then moderate income is 81 to 120, and then above moderate is greater than 120. So
What we can do it, and Tara, just quickly, what we can do as reference as well within the context of the housing element is include a chart for the area median income, the current area median income. That's very easy to do. And just as reference, for a family of 4, the 30% AMI level is For family of 4, it's 34,650. For low income, for a family of 4, it's 57,750, but we can actually include this as a chart in the housing element as reference. The numbers might change in April, so if we have that in time for publishing the housing element, we will include that so that people are aware what these percentages of income mean in actual numbers.
Yeah, and can I add that it currently is on our draft element that can be found in our project website, and it can be found on page 13.
Great. Thank you, Myra.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Myra and Carlos. Thank you. Okay, great. And I guess you can probably toggle back to the Jamboard. Thank you. Great question. And
Can we go back a slide? I just want to make sure that they had the opportunity to fully comment, because we went through
on the Jamboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's talking about the Jamboard, Emma.
Yeah, on the Jamboard. I just wanted to make sure, because we were having issues with the microphone accessibility, that people are able to comment on what they think should be included in a complete and connected community if there's other elements that need to be considered. I think it's important that they let us know.
Good point, yes.
Is there any other factors that we should consider?
Sí, perdón.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to state something that we've been sharing for a while, is that we've asked for the housing units to not be built near pollution sources, because that's something that's already happening on the west side of National City. So one of the things that we're asking for, including also the Toto project, 24th Street Toto project, is something that we are continually insisting on. We do not want to have more families who are putting their health at risk by being too closely located to pollution sources.
Okay. Sure. That's good feedback.
Thank you.
Any other pieces to this so we can move on to the next slide?
I wanted to add that when you talk about having equity in housing, I would like you to think of the people of National City. There are many people who currently don't have access to this housing. So to prioritize local residents so that we don't displace people, and for it to be truly low income, because when you talk about thresholds of 34,650, there are people who don't make even that. So that's what we consider low income, particularly now with the impacts of the pandemic.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's a great point. And we are putting language in the housing element that will prioritize local residents for affordable housing when that is definitely possible. So sometimes when there's federal funds then that may not be, but when it's funds that's totally okay to prioritize National City residents, that's definitely what we want to do. And because I think we've seen experiences in other cities too where they didn't do that, and people from other cities came in and took all that affordable housing. So yeah, that's definitely not what we want. And Carlos, you said, in Paradise Creek, we're able to prioritize National City residents. So that was an example of that worked well.
So just a quick time check. We'll be rotating the facilitators momentarily. So contribute any remaining thoughts.
Great, thanks, Suji. Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
access to grocery stores is so important, and grocery stores that have good fresh food like Sprouts, definitely. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, and Suchi, I'm not seeing the pop-ups for some reason. Maybe that's because we're viewing Emma's board, but you said we're probably about to switch.
Yeah, it's time to switch.
Okay, so thanks everybody. We really appreciate your comments, and you're now going to be switched to one of the for transportation or climate action plan to make some comments there, but we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bear with me as I move our facilitators. Thank you for your patience. All right. So just to double check with Angelita, Alana, Annie, your interpretation setting is set to English. So,
Yes.
all right, fantastic. So Carlos, our interpreter, will be helping translate comments that come in Spanish to English, and we'll be relaying comments and feedback back and forth.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be looking at some measures we are proposing for the Climate Action Plan. We're going to hear from you on how you prioritize these measures. So if we go over to the next slide, we're going to be looking at these measures, and they are, in English. So hopefully we can translate it over okay. So we're going to be looking at these measures and prioritizing your first choice in green. So on our end, we're going to color code them. For example, if we found improving bicycle infrastructure important, we would highlight it green as our first choice. So I know there's a lot on here. We'll kind of read through a few of them. So a few measures we're including would be improving bicycle infrastructure, improving access to bike share and electric scooters, on-demand transit, for example, Dial-A-Ride, expanding transit service to increase the stops and the frequency, pedestrian improvements, including ADA access, safe routes to school, more dense housing, near transit stops, reducing single-person car trips, and more bike lanes and sidewalks to complete streets. And we want to incentivize commuters to use alternative modes of transportation. So some of these, we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So implementing some of these would help reduce the amount of a single car use. And so that would in turn reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So if you guys have any thoughts, if anything initially is speaking to you, just shout out which one, would be really important to you. I didn't read them all, but if any so far have stood out to you, let me know and we will mark those as important. Yes.
Can I talk?
Yes.
Okay, to me, I think it would be important to incentivize people to use other modes of transportation, because we know that one of the greatest sources of pollution is vehicle emissions, and even some of the buses in our communities. So to me, this is important.
Great. Thank you. Great to hear back. Any others? We also are looking for more electric vehicle charging stations, making new development ready for electric vehicles. We give everyone a bike. Green public transportation fleets like street sweepers or, buses. Any other important ones to you all?
It would also be great to expand the transit service stops and frequency.
Okay.
I feel that this would also help our elderly population. Many of these people cannot walk very far. So if we had more stops so that they can use public transit, but then to also have cleaner public transit.
Great.
And for it to run more frequently.
Yes.
Yeah, more stops more frequently with cleaner buses. I also think it would be very important to expand public transit. There are certain streets, for example, several of us are also in a group called Kitchenistas. So we go to Olivewood Gardens, and there are no buses that run there. So we have to walk from 24th Street all the way in, which is several blocks. And it's good, to walk, but sometimes, we just don't have enough time. So maybe they should look at routes on different streets where people go, where they have markets, where they have community gardens like the one we go to see whether we could expand bus routes to those streets.
Great.
Or add another route.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We will write that in there. So we are on a time schedule. We have a few other slides to look at. So let's move on. We can come back if there are any last comments. Now we're going to be looking at renewable energy production. A few include joining a community choice energy program. So SDG&E electricity providers could outsource their, they could get their electricity from solar panels, for example, and the community would opt in to join and get their electricity from that source. So that's an option. We could require solar panels in all new development and ADUs. So if you don't see something on here that you'd like to add, please just let us know. We're looking for all and any input.
Well, we had said at an earlier time that solar panels are a good source of energy. They're clean energy. But in our opinion, it should be not just for new developments, but perhaps to retrofit government buildings, schools, places where we already have facilities, but where it would be great to have solar energy, because we know they are some of the larger consumers.
Great. That is a great idea. Thank you. Yeah, so Annie, if you want to add in there, clean energy for existing development, like schools, government facilities. So not only new development. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. Here, we'll look at residential and commercial building efficiencies. So a few things we're proposing is to encourage cool roofs, educate the community on energy savings, regulate lighting for commercial buildings, energy efficiency improvements, energy efficiency rebate programs, plant urban trees to offset some heat, cool down urban areas, and provide and incentivize energy efficient retrofits. So that may help with the last comment that we just received. So it may be in line with that. So we can prioritize them. So like Annie just did, she turned that sticky note blue. So if
I was just reading here, it says educate community on energy savings. I think that that's also important because there are peak hours for energy consumption, and people can avoid that so that we can start consuming less. But many times people don't know about it. And I think that would be an important factor as well.
Great.
And at EHC, the Environmental Health Coalition, we used to have a program where we went door to door, letting people know how they could save energy in their home. And there are many things that are so easy for people to do, but they don't do them simply because they don't know. The fact of, turning off a light if you're not in that room, or turning off the TV if you're not in that room. And that program was very successful. People would get excited about it and they would involve their kids. So those types of programs are always good, because many people hear about it on TV, but it's not the same thing than having an actual conversation with them.
Great. Yes, absolutely. Oh, you don't hear, you have to choose your, Annie, choose your English down below, your translation.
She would have to stop sharing screen.
Oh, okay.
So if she stopped sharing screen real quick, then she could choose English and then reshare the screen so she can actually hear the interpretation.
How about do that? Do that, Annie. Yeah.
Well, she can't hear me, so you'd have to let her know.
Oh, Annie, sorry. Stop sharing.
I'll drop a message in the chat box to Annie.
Okay. And Annie, can you change, sorry, the second sticky note to the right, educate community on energy savings? Let's turn that to green, please. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next slide, Annie. So now looking at solid waste, here are a few things we're looking to include. Using food waste as compost in community gardens, educate the community on recycling and other activities for diverting their waste from the trash. Use restaurant and groceries to reduce waste. Include zero waste programs at schools. Maybe do a curbside composting program. Hold quarterly e-waste and recycling events. Green waste recycling programs that include maybe green waste and organic waste. And overall, look to divert 80% of our total solid waste generated from landfills. So doing that green waste recycling, composting events and whatnot. So do any of these stand out to you all?
So there is a comment that just got dropped into the chat. Is there a way to make it easier to recycle batteries?
I just got letter from our trash collection company indicating that it is now mandatory to segregate our trash. Food waste, even tea bags, has to be moved to a separate container because they want to have regular trash exclusively, and and then papers and documents and the blue recycling bin, but now all food waste in a different container. I don't know if that's a new regulation in National City that's asking us to do that. And we also know that e-waste cannot be thrown out with the trash, that it has to be taken to special containers for all electric and electronic devices. But is that a new law in National City to have to segregate organic or food waste?
We'll note that. Angelita, do you know if that's?
I don't know for sure, but it's not a new law. I think it's a program that EDCO is trying to implement just to help with recycling efforts.
So Annie, let's maybe write a note saying, separating trash and recycling items and compost. It's kind of a question comment and moving forward. Okay, well, we have two more slides, so let's move on to the next one. We're looking at water and wastewater management. So here are some ways we can reduce our emissions as it relates to water. So perhaps we reuse water in parks and green spaces. We have water efficiency and rebate programs. We can do water efficient landscaping and include water efficient retrofits for families. Other items include incentivizing and encouraging weather-based irrigation controllers, include rain barrels, sidewalk gardens, or permeable pavers, are just some ideas. So are any of these important to you? Some folks thought reusing water in parks and green spaces would be a good idea. And having rebate programs to update some electronics like washing machines, dishwashers, to be a little more water efficient is a good idea as well. Well, we don't have any comments here, but we have one more slide as it relates to the safety element and natural events that may occur as a result of climate change, and how we adapt our community to be more resilient to these events. So, for example, extreme heat, flooding, excess precipitation. So here we have, let's see, considering backup for energy systems, providing access to cooling centers and medical support, having an alert program where we alert residents of high or extreme heat days, including restoration of creeks and maintaining floodway channels in case of flash flooding or something that would occur, ensure that water can move properly. For extreme heat, maybe we have water features for cooling areas, having open space parks, adding shade trees. Are any of these important to you? We can do first choice. Yes, I saw a hand there. Yeah.
Okay, when it comes to floods,
Mm-hmm.
we've been working a lot on the west side of National City, and the Paradise Creek area has regular floods near Kimball Elementary and 18th Street and Hoover. And we've had that issue for a long time. And I think now with the development of the new park, it will be mitigated somewhat. But if something could be done rather to try to manage that flooding issue, because we're now going to have a community garden and a park there as well.
Yes, I just chatted to you. I don't know if you can see it. So she was saying there's been a lot of work on the west side of National City, but there's been increase in Paradise Creek flooding. So if we could somehow mitigate for that flooding and try to manage that issue, the new park will help a little. But if we have any other ideas, it looks like everyone's back in the main room. So we will wrap up.
We will be reopening the breakout rooms for the final activity. There was a little bit of a technical glitch, so we'll go through and make sure everybody has a chance to do that last activity. So bear with us for a few minutes, and we'll move on. Everybody should be seeing an invitation to rejoin. I'm going to go ahead and rotate the facilitators into the correct rooms. Thank you for your patience. All right, thank you everybody for your patience. Sorry about that, but we will move on with the last activity. Seth, Roberto, if you could please make sure that your interpretation setting is set to English. Ryan, you as well, please go ahead and check your language settings. So our interpreter Carlos will be relaying comments to us, and we'll be moving forward from there. And I see a few notes about folks on the Spanish channel being unable to unmute themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that. And hopefully we can hear from you directly.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Welcome to the Transportation Board. Ryan and I are gonna walk through 2 maps today in the next about 15 minutes. So we'll first start off by describing what's on the map. And then hopefully we'll spend most of our time listening to you and making sure that we captured everything. And so that's really the purpose of today. We're also joined by looks like Roberto from the city. And let me just make sure I have everybody from the city if there are any questions as well. So welcome. So to begin, let's start with looking at the map here. We're looking at pedestrian improvements that we've identified and needs throughout the city. And the red dots are called location-based pedestrian needs. And what do we mean by that? Excuse me, those might be areas of opportunity, like connecting across the freeway on a new pedestrian bridge from the west side to the trolley station, or as we showed in the earlier presentation, looking at existing locations of freeway crossings where undercrossings where today it might be dark and narrow and not welcoming for pedestrians, looking for opportunities and needs to open that up to really help connect each side of the city through additional lighting, wider sidewalks through those areas, and landscaping as Ryan is circling there. Do you want to circle that one more time, Ryan? And so that's what we might mean. Those are 2 examples of what we might mean by some of those dots that you see there. The next one in green are sidewalk needs. And sidewalk needs are illustrated here in green. Those are areas where the city has identified missing sidewalks. They have an inventory across the entire city. And so I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We want to make sure that we capture that need. And then we have 2 more here, one in red and one in purple. The red one is called pedestrian safety corridors. These are areas where we've identified through the previous plans, community input and stakeholder input, and our own analysis, opportunities and needs for an entire pedestrian corridor where we have features that may be needed, like shown here, of wider sidewalks at particular intersections and crossings to narrow that crossing distance, provide opportunities for landscaping, and to separate the people and the pedestrians from the vehicles a bit more, and narrow those crossing distances to increase safety and visibility of the pedestrians. Also might include features like the pedestrian high visibility crosswalks as shown there, and other design features to really improve the pedestrian experience. And those corridors connect to key destinations like schools, transit, grocery stores, etc. But when we get into the grocery store area or key retail areas, we look at the same features, but we really then also want to additionally not acknowledge that there's a need to support the economic vibrancy of the city and those retail stores. And so we need to look at additional features along those walkable retail corridors shown in purple. Features like I think are so well illustrated by the 8th Street, the recent project there that the city has done, where they've identified angled parking opportunities, medians, street furniture and trees and landscaping, as well as maybe even wider sidewalks to allow for, say, pedestrian cafes on the street for tables and whatnot. So those are areas where things like that might be needed to looked at. So let me open it up to you. Either raise your hand, go ahead and unmute, and or type into the chat. We'll be monitoring all of them. What are the areas that you like? What are your priorities? Where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong? Where did we miss something? Hi, Sylvia. Yeah, great comment. And Ryan, do you want to go ahead and circle that area here and illustrate some of the, there you go. So that area is kind of illustrated right here, the 24th Street trolley station. And we've identified a number of improvements there. In purple, because of the retail corridor there on Bay Marine 24th, we've identified the whole street as an opportunity to really improve the pedestrian experience along the street. More crossings, safer crossings, etc. And then Ryan, go ahead. You were about to say something.
And then they kind of overlap here, but there's a couple dots here. One of them represents the pedestrian bridge that's been proposed that connects the 24th Street trolley station over to the west side. And then the other dot is for the undercrossing itself, again, to find ways to improve the crossing under the freeway as well. And so right now that we're identifying the needs, and so that becomes that opportunity to then kind of move forward from there.
Sylvia, did we capture your specific need there, or should we identify another need here? Were you talking about the undercrossing or right at 24th Street trolley? Okay. Great, and yeah, in fact, yesterday number one is one of the key plans that we looked at it's called the Harbor Drive South Plan, and it identified a number of opportunities there. But yesterday we got another comment similarly that let's make sure we make great pedestrian and bicycle connections across and down to Pepper Park and the great marina that you have here and the Great Bay asset that you have. And so we heard that comment yesterday as well, and we're glad to hear it today. So we're going to make sure that we identify that corridor of Bay Marina and then on down as a need to improve bicycle and pedestrian connectivity to really connect the community to that great asset. Is that what you were talking about? Does that make sense? Okay. Great, thank you for the input. Other questions or comments? Are there things that you see that here that you like that we got right? Or what is missing? Well, I'll pause here for a minute. I'll say one of the things that we found and we heard yesterday as well is there were a couple of specific locations where there was maybe a pedestrian crossing need at say Central Elementary School, where there's a need for an improved crossing opportunity. So we've identified that. And then additionally, what we're starting to see is this, and you'll see it when we flip over to the bike map in a moment here, is this overlap of these key pedestrian corridors with key bicycle corridors. And so when we started to see, and maybe Ryan, you want to kind of circle those here, this opportunity for these key corridors that Ryan's circling, D and 4th, down Harbison, and then across 18th Street, where there's an opportunity to perhaps create this core network of bicycle and pedestrian friendly streets that can allow the community on the west side to get north-south, the community on the east side to get north-south, and these east-west connections, allowing for more options to people. What are your thoughts about that? And maybe we'll flip over as we do that to the bike map. You can go ahead and give the thumbs up sign as well on the map. Okay, great. Okay, so let's look at the bike map for a moment here. On this map, we're identifying bicycle facilities and key areas where traffic calming is needed. And Ryan, you know what I'm forgetting to mention is we did hear, and did we capture this, that on 18th Street, there was potentially a need for traffic calming as well. So
Yeah,
you may want to make sure you did capture that. Great.
Yeah, I'll just copy it one more time.
Okay, so with that in mind, then let me go through and describe what we're seeing on the map. So in brown, either dashed line or solid line are proposed or existing bicycle facilities. And so you can see a great network there of bicycle facilities to connect the city to within itself from one end to the other and to its surrounding communities. And maybe just to highlight there, you can see that connection from Bay Marina, then down to Pepper Park, et cetera. And as well as the Bayshore Bikeway, which connects to the entire region. In dark blue, we've identified opportunities for either new bicycle facilities or improved bicycle facilities. And so we're looking at what does that bicycle facility look like? It might encapsulate things like shown here of bike lanes, or even buffered bike lanes. So it's like a normal bike lane, but it has a wider buffer stripe there. Do you want to highlight that, Ryan, on the map? There's that buffer. Additional wayfinding and signage to allow bicyclists to say, well, where can I go next on this great network of low stress bike facilities, and really identifying just the best bicycle facility that's possible for along those streets. And then above that, we have traffic calming identified, either corridors or districts. So this is again where through plans or our existing analysis, or through talking with the community and Ryan's great local knowledge because of he's lived there his entire life, knowing where there's speeding is an issue. And so we've identified an entire district in that northwest corner. Do you want to circle that? And particular corridors along there. Let me add some of what we've already heard from others is that we heard about the roller coasters and the need to add those. And I thought there was only one roller coaster in National City. There are two apparently, one on National or Division and one on 4th. So there's some speeding along there. And then of course, in our previous group, we were talking about 18th Street being another one of those areas where cars like to speed. And so those are some areas that we're going to add to this needs. Where are we missing it? Go ahead, Sylvia. Yeah, absolutely. We and the city have designed through those flood areas a number of times before, making sure that we have appropriate areas of drainage for stormwater runoff. Actually, maybe we need to mention this. Perhaps there's opportunities for green street treatments where we can actually use areas of the street to capture stormwater and actually filter it and make it, clean it before it gets into the bay. So that might be another opportunity we should mention here, Ryan. Yeah. So there's a couple of opportunities along there, but why don't we go ahead and capture that, flooding is an issue that needs to be specifically addressed through the design process in that area. Does that sound good?
Yeah, and other treatments that are available there, Sylvia, you saw in terms of pedestrian improvements, the city's done a lot of work to kind of keep the flooded areas above the flooding, pedestrians above the flooding areas so that kids can get to school, and they've done some of those raised crosswalk treatments and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that I'm aware that the city's been designing for, and it's something that we'll be sure to capture in this plan as well for the transportation side.
Alicia, you had a question.
Yes. So I had a comment rather. I have seen that you've been added a lot of infrastructure for bicycles. What I haven't seen, however, is places where we can store our bikes or lock them up. For example, if we go to the supermarket, my husband has had to go through that. He wants to take his bicycle to the supermarket, but he doesn't because there's nowhere to leave it outside of the market. So I see a lot of these bike lanes and bike infrastructure. It looks great, but not many people are using them, but that could be because there is no place to leave them when you get to places, to make sure they don't get stolen. So is there a way to look into that need?
Alicia, great comment. And actually, we heard this comment before as well. And so let us make sure we note that at key locations, so transit stops, schools, parks, grocery stores, that we have those the appropriate bicycle storage.
Yes, bicycle parking. Thank you.
Bicycle parking. Okay. Great. Let's make sure we note that again. Thank you. Other comments?
Moon had one, I'm marking it down here, a roundabout at Plaza and Grove.
Great. Other questions, comments, things you like? And while we're waiting, maybe Ryan, you can illustrate once again, you can see the same roads that overlap with the pedestrian opportunities. We have these key corridors along D, 4th, Harbison, and then down to 18th Street, where we end up with this network, this core network of bicycle and pedestrian oriented roads that can allow people to connect north-south on the west side, east-west across across the 805 in the city, and then north-south on the east side. And that's that overlapping opportunity there. Montserrat, did you have a question?
Yes. Well, as Sylvia was indicating, we have been asking for that connectivity between the West Side National City and Pepper Park. And one of the alternatives was to have some sort of bike lane or pedestrian path. I think I may have heard that there are already plans in place, but we just wanted to make sure that that connectivity would happen.
Great question and comment here. Let's make sure we note that, and Ryan's doing that here. And then Ryan, when you do that, do you want to illustrate? I think this is a great map. Yeah, don't cover it up.
Yeah.
This is a great map to illustrate that planned improvement project.
Right. So for pedestrian connectivity, there is the pedestrian bridge that's being proposed here from the trolley station over, as well as the improved undercrossings down here. In terms of bicycle connectivity, there is the regional Bayshore Bikeway that's coming in. That's going to be coming up through this portion and over here down to Harbor. But as part of the Toto plan, the waterfront to homefront plan, and then our plan, they're also proposing closing down 19th Street over here and creating a bicycle path that then can connect to Bayshore Bikeway. So ideally, what would then happen is with the improved bicycle facilities on 18th, you'd be able to take your bike through here and down to the Bayshore Bikeway, which would then connect down to Pepper Park. So that's one way that we're looking at improvements. There's also additional improvements on 24th Street for bikes, but it gets very constrained under the crossing here. So just providing additional ways for people to get around and through is the overall goal.
Sorry.
Sorry, 22nd and Hoover. Oh, right. So as part of the Toto recommendations, so Martin, do you want to speak to that really quickly?
Sure. There's been a kind of a couple of things over in that area There was talk at one point, I think during the original West Side specific plan adoption of Hoover between 22nd and 24th actually being vacated and turned into, you know, basically part of the lots either side and sort of a private parking area to sort of get some through traffic out of the West Side. As far as the Toto plan, Toto does have some extensive treatment along 22nd Street from the trolley station to the east past Highland Avenue, understanding that it is a main artery, if you will, between there and the National City Park Apartments, which obviously there are a lot of people who live there and would like to get better access, pedestrian access to the trolley station. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. Does that answer your question? Sure. Well, I mean, in Toto, that's that's a plan, so it's not necessarily a concrete set of actual options. Any work that would be done in the right of way would obviously be done through our city's capital improvement project, and then there would obviously be a transparent process involved where everybody would know what was going on. As far as the change in the street, I don't think there would be a great deal other than potentially improve pedestrian access, which may involve wider sidewalks, but that hasn't actually been worked out at this point. You're welcome.
So just a quick time check. We will be closing this last breakout activity and reconvening as a group.
If anyone has any other additional comments on either of these mobility maps, feel free to ask during the general Q&A or during office hours. And you'll see all these opportunities as we wrap up this workshop.
Yes, everything from the website, everything from today's webinar will be published on the city's website related to the Focus General Plan update. So you can contact us directly and we'll let you know what that is, but we'll share that at the end also.
All right, so thank you everybody for participating in these activities. Please go ahead and recheck your language settings, and we will go ahead and move on with our program. If we could have a quick shout out from each of the facilitators on their few key themes that rose, that would be great. So Seth, if you could go ahead and start.
Fourth. Yeah, so that was a big one. The bike parking needs. That's a major inhibitor to people using the bike facilities. So more bike parking across the city, more roundabouts and traffic circles. They're very popular ideas to help slow speeds and traffic calm. And then some additional pedestrian crossing opportunities along 30th Street, as well as Central and near Central Elementary.
Great. Alana, would you like to recap, please?
Sure. So we saw some suggestions for improving access to bike share and electric scooters, and including rideshare opportunities. We would like to see more dense housing near transit stops and expand transit service, so more stops and more frequencies, and have ways to charge electric vehicles in new development and existing facilities. We've also seen some suggestions to incentivize solar in new construction as well as existing facilities, like libraries, government operations, and whatnot. We would like to see decarbonizing of buildings and electrifying them. Community gardens for neighborhoods. It would increase the clean eating and less food waste and engage the community. We also saw reusing water in parks and green spaces, and let's see, maintaining and restoring creeks to maintain floodway channels, especially in Paradise Creek, looking to help reduce the flooding there. So those are some of our suggestions.
Great, thank you. I'll recap ours quickly because I know we only have a few more minutes, and we definitely heard a lot of stuff. So I'm sorry if I don't get to everyone, but we do have your notes, and those will be on the Jam boards. So we heard, so this is in the housing and land use, we talked about opportunities for home ownership, that's important, that, you know, of course we still want to continue to have rentals, but also make opportunities for home ownership and how we can kind of incentivize that. And we talked about that, you know, through density bonus programs as a way that we can also incentivize increasing density on people's property that own property today, and they're looking at, you know, how or ways of how they can add housing to their property. We also talked about accessory dwelling units, and that, you know, in the housing element, we are going to be have goals and recommendations to make it easier, more affordable for people to build ADUs on their property. We also heard comments about not adding more housing by polluting sources, that is important. We also heard that we definitely want, you know, adequate open space in neighborhoods, that the electrification of multifamily houses over having them use gas is good for the environment. We also heard concerns about not having kind of all the density be on the west side, that that also that putting some of that density on the east side of National City. And we talked about parking, that there's concerns about when multifamily residential goes in, that they may then not be enough parking, they'll have to park on the street, and that will kind of exacerbate problems that we have with parking. And let's see, we heard comments about that maybe more two-story is appropriate along these corridors that we talked about. And that probably about sums it up. So, but thank you everyone for your comments. We really appreciate it. And then if you could advance the slide, please. Great. So we'll just kind of tell you about upcoming steps. So, well, the webinar, we're having that right now, but we do have office hours coming up on Thursday, March 25th and Tuesday, March 30th. And so you really can call us anytime or email us anytime, but we just set up these office hours so that they are distinctly for this project, so that we won't be busy doing something else. And then we do also have office hours in Spanish. And the housing element, the draft housing element, as I mentioned before, is online right now, and we are taking public comments on that until April 1st. So please submit those if you're interested. Next slide, please. And so we're hoping to go to the Planning Commission in April, and then in May for City Council for adoption of the housing element. And then we will be submitting the housing element to the state for certification. Next slide. And then other dates coming up, from April to June, we'll be working on the modeling of the 2050 alternatives and the traffic analysis. And then in June, we're aiming for the draft elements of the draft climate action plan, and the additional elements will be available for public review and comment. June to December, so we'll be working on the supplemental EIR preparation, which includes the scoping meeting, which that's a public meeting, and getting public input related to that process. December 21 to February 2022 is when we anticipate the hearings and approvals for the SEIR. And so next slide, please. And so we just have a few more minutes. If you do have any other Q&A, if you could please use the chat feature, and we will read that off and answer it. And Suchi or Emma, have you guys seen any chat that may have come previously that we should address?
There was a comment and question that came in previously about ADUs and why the county and city of San Diego have ADU permit ready programs. What is National City doing about this?
Okay, great. Yeah. ADUs is definitely part of the whole toolbox of providing more housing and providing affordable housing. And so we are definitely looking at ways of how to make that easier, more affordable. And we are looking at also doing those permit ready that you have mentioned in that comment. So like you mentioned, City of San Diego and some other cities around have blueprints basically that are already approved. So if someone wants to build an ADU, they like one of those blueprints, then it's a really easy and much more affordable process to do that with these already approved plans, permit ready plans. So yeah, we're going to be looking at adopting some of those as well. So thank you for that comment. Are there any others, Suchi?
That was the only one I saw. It looks like we have a comment just thanking the presenters and organizers, appreciating the format of the breakout rooms.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. And we were trying to make it more engaging because we know with this virtual environment, that's a little tough. If we were in person, we would have probably a big open house for this kind of project because there's so many elements, which makes it a little hard to do in just in a 2-hour time frame. So we hope that the breakout rooms gave you some time to talk to the staff and those of us, the consultants that are working on these particular elements and ask questions and be engaged. So we appreciate that, and thank you for standing by too with any kind of technical difficulties. We're still getting used to this different technology to really hope to make this more engaging. So we appreciate your patience. And with that, it looks like, it's just about noon here, so we will let you all go. But thanks again for your time, and definitely please call us or email us if you have any questions or follow-up or just comments. And again, please look at the housing element online and give us your feedback. And we really appreciate it. But again, thanks for your time, and hope you have a good rest of your afternoon. Bye, everybody.
you.
Thank you.